There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with thunder or warning. They come quietly, in a flickering hallway, under fluorescent lights that hum just slightly too loud, while the world moves around you as if nothing at all has changed. My moment came on a Tuesday night in February at Mercy General Hospital in Chicago, when my son looked at me the way you look at something you've already decided to leave behind. I was standing in the hallway outside the maternity ward. I'd been there for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I'd checked my watch when I arrived, the way you do when you're trying to hold yourself together with small, measurable facts. The bag on my shoulder, old dark brown leather, soft from years of handling, had been a gift from my mother the year I turned 40. "Carry this during the important moments," she told me. She was right, as mothers usually are. That bag had been with me when Thomas and I signed the papers on our first house, when I sat in the waiting room the night he was diagnosed, when I dropped Ethan at the bus station the day he left for college and stood there smiling until the bus turned the corner and I couldn't see it anymore. And now it was here with me in this hallway, while the sound of a newborn's first cry came muffled through a closed door. My grandson, alive and breathing, somewhere on the other side of a wall I wasn't allowed to cross. Ethan stepped out into the hallway. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing something. "Mom," his voice was careful, the way you are careful with something fragile, not because you love it, but because you don't want the mess of it breaking. "Diane needs her family right now." I searched his face for the boy I knew, the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides, the boy who cried in my arms the night his father died and said, "Don't let go, Mom." And I didn't. I held him until nearly 3 in the morning, until his breathing finally steadied. "I am family, Ethan." He looked away. "Her family. Just, please don't make this harder." I want to tell you that I said something powerful then, something a woman of 63 years and a lifetime of hard-earned wisdom should say. But I didn't. I nodded. I picked up my bag. I turned and walked down the long corridor of Mercy General Hospital, past the families laughing, past the new grandmothers holding tiny bundles and crying the good kind of tears, past the nurses who didn't know me and the strangers who didn't care. I walked out into February air that hit my face like a door slamming shut. I had traveled 19 hours on a Greyhound bus to stand in that hallway for 4 minutes, and I left without knowing if my grandson had his father's eyes. My name is Margaret Sullivan. Everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 63 years old, born and raised in a small town outside of Nashville, Tennessee, in a house with a wide front porch and a pecan tree in the backyard that my father planted the year I was born. I grew up in a family that didn't have much money, but never felt poor, because my mother had a way of making everything feel intentional. The patched quilt on my bed wasn't worn out. It was storied. The second-hand piano in the living room wasn't a compromise. It was a treasure. She taught me that dignity is not something you're given. It's something you choose, every single day, in the way you carry yourself through the things life puts in front of you. I married Thomas Sullivan when I was 24. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but depth. He worked in construction management, got up before the sun, came home with dirt on his boots and warmth in his eyes. We weren't a dramatic love story. We were a steady one, and I have always believed steady is better. We had Ethan when I was 29. I remember the night exactly. A summer storm so loud it rattled the windows. Thomas gripping the steering wheel with both hands driving 90 miles an hour to the hospital. Me in the back seat counting breaths and thinking, this is the most important thing that will ever happen to me. I was right. From the moment they placed that baby on my chest, wet and pink and furious at the world, everything rearranged itself. Not in the dramatic way people describe, more quietly than that. Like furniture being moved in the night, and you wake up in the morning and the room is different, and it's better, and you can't quite remember how it used to be. We named him Ethan Thomas Sullivan. He had his father's forehead and my stubbornness, which made for an interesting combination. The early years were ordinary in all the best ways. Thomas left for work at 6. I stayed home with Ethan, and those mornings, sunlight through the kitchen window, the smell of coffee, Ethan babbling in his high chair while I made oatmeal, those mornings were the whole world to me. I didn't need anything else. I really didn't. When Ethan was 3, he started helping me cook. Helping, I should clarify, in the sense that he stood on a step stool and stirred things with tremendous confidence and very little accuracy. Flour everywhere, egg on the cabinet door, his face absolutely covered in whatever we were making, grinning like he'd built something magnificent. "One day you'll be better at this than me," I told him once. He looked at me very seriously. "I just want to be like you, Mom." I have held on to that sentence for 30 years. Thomas got sick when Ethan was 15. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much warning and doesn't negotiate. 8 months from the first symptom to the last morning. That last morning started like any other. Thomas kissed my forehead at the kitchen table and said, "See you tonight, sweetheart." He walked out the door. He never walked back in. I got the call at 11 a.m. I drove to the hospital with Ethan in the passenger seat, and I remember holding the steering wheel very tightly and telling myself, "Be strong for him, be strong for him, be strong for him," like a prayer I wasn't sure anyone was listening to. The doctor came out with that look doctors have when the news is the worst kind. We'd already known it was coming. That didn't make it smaller. Ethan stood beside me in that corridor and he took my hand and didn't say anything. He was 15 years old and he already understood that some things don't have words. We went in to see Thomas one last time, and Ethan put his hand over his father's and said quietly, "Okay, Dad, okay." That was my son. That was who he was. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Not because I broke. I couldn't afford to break. But because carrying grief while also carrying a grieving child requires a kind of endurance that doesn't have a name. I sold our house and moved us into a smaller apartment, more manageable, more honest about what we were now. 2 people instead of 3, making do with what we had. I got a job as a nursing assistant at a private clinic. Days. Then I picked up evening shifts at an urgent care clinic across town. I got home most nights around 8:30. Ethan always had dinner waiting. He'd learned to cook while I was working, quietly, without being asked. "How was your day, Mom?" "Good, baby. How was yours?" "I saved you the last biscuit." Those evenings at the kitchen table, tired as I was, feet aching, hands smelling of sanitizer, those evenings were what kept me going. We were a small family, but we were a whole one. Ethan graduated high school with honors. He got a full scholarship to the University of Illinois for civil engineering. I sat in the front row at his graduation and cried so hard that Dorothy Hawkins, my best friend of 40 years sitting right beside me, had to pass me tissues she'd preloaded into her cardigan pocket. "I knew you'd be a disaster," Dot whispered, smiling. She wasn't wrong. On the day Ethan left for college, I drove him to the bus station, helped him with his bags, sat with him in the waiting area. When they announced his bus, we held each other for a long time. "Call me when you get there." "I will, Mom." "Eat real food, not just whatever's in the vending machine." "Mom," "and sleep. You need 8 hours, Ethan. You always have." He laughed. "I know. I love you. I love you more." He stepped onto that bus, found the window seat, and pressed his hand to the glass. I stood there smiling until the bus disappeared into traffic. Then I sat back down in that plastic chair in the bus station and cried for 20 minutes, completely alone, in the way that is only possible when no one who knows you is watching. Ethan's first 3 years in Chicago were good. He called every evening, 9 o'clock, reliable as sunrise. He told me about his projects, his coworkers, the city that still overwhelmed him with its noise and its pace and its absolute refusal to slow down for anyone. "Do you like it?" I asked once. "I do, but sometimes I miss how quiet home is." "Home is still here, sweetheart. Nothing's changed." I meant it as comfort. Looking back, I wonder if he heard it as pressure. I'll never know for certain. The calls became less frequent gradually, the way seasons change, slowly enough that you don't notice until you're standing in a coat when you meant to be in shirt sleeves. Every evening became every other day became once a week. Once a week became silence sometimes for 10 days or 2 weeks, with a brief text in between that said busy, talk soon, and nothing else. I told myself it was normal. Children grow up. They build their own lives. I had raised him to be independent, and independence looks like this sometimes. Distance and quiet, and trusting that the love is still there, even when the calls aren't. I tried to believe that. Then one Sunday afternoon, a text arrived. "Mom, I met someone. Her name's Diane. She's incredible." A text, not a phone call. I looked at those words for a moment, then typed back. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Tell me about her." He called that evening, one of the longer calls we'd had in months. Diane Whitmore, an architect, Yale-educated. Her father was a corporate attorney in Hartford, Connecticut. Her mother, Patricia, was a college professor. Diane was 30, 4 years older than Ethan, and he said her name the way people say words they've been tasting all day. I was happy for him. I want to be clear about that. Whatever came after, whatever I came to understand about what was happening, in that moment, hearing my son's voice full of something bright and alive, I was genuinely, completely happy for him. But sitting in my small kitchen in Tennessee, looking at the chair where Ethan used to do his homework, I felt something shift very quietly at the center of my chest. I didn't have a word for it then. I do now. It was the beginning of becoming invisible. The first time I understood that Diane and I would not be what I'd hoped, it wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a wedding invitation sent by email. Mr. Ethan Sullivan and Miss Diane Whitmore cordially invite you to celebrate their marriage. That read like a form letter. No, dear Mom. No, we can't wait to share this with you. Just my name on a list. At the wedding itself, held at a venue in downtown Chicago that I could tell cost more than I made in 3 months, I sat in the 4th row. Patricia Whitmore sat in the front, wearing a blue dress that probably had a designer's name inside it, smiling in every photograph beside the bride and groom. She had been part of planning the wedding. She had been consulted on the flowers, the venue, the menu. I knew this because Ethan mentioned it once, casually, the way you mention weather. I wore the navy dress I'd bought on sale at the mall in Nashville. I looked appropriate. I sat in my chair and I watched my son marry a woman I had met twice, and I told myself that this was how it was supposed to go. Children leave, they build new families, and you love them from wherever you end up standing. I stood in the 4th row, as it turned out. After the wedding, the calls became monthly, then less. When Diane's name came up, it was always in the context of what she'd decided, what she preferred, what she needed. Ethan had reorganized his entire existence around someone else's center of gravity, which is not unusual for newlyweds. What was unusual was how thoroughly I had been moved to the margins. Then came the pregnancy. Ethan called to tell me Diane was 4 months along. I asked why I hadn't heard sooner. We wanted to wait, Mom. You know how it is. I didn't know, because I would later find out that Patricia Whitmore had been told at 8 weeks. I started knitting immediately. A yellow blanket, neutral, careful, hopeful, with the name Oliver worked into one corner in small white stitches. I found out the name through a text from Ethan, matter of fact, like an agenda item. I spent 6 weeks on that blanket, packed it with a handwritten card. Grandma can't wait to meet you, Oliver. You are already so loved. And shipped it priority mail. 2 weeks later, Ethan texted. Got it, thanks. Diane said nothing. I sent her a message on Facebook. Congratulations, sweetheart. Wishing you all the health and joy in the world. I'm here if you need anything at all. The message showed as read within the hour. She never replied. I told myself she was tired. Pregnancy is exhausting. Some people aren't phone people, aren't message people. I found every reasonable explanation and I leaned on them like a fence I was afraid to look over. When I finally called Ethan and asked directly, "Can I be there when Oliver is born?" I heard him exhale slowly before he spoke. Diane needs peace and quiet, Mom. The doctor said to minimize stress. I wouldn't stress anyone. I just want to be there. I know. Ethan? Will Patricia be there? A pause. Shorter than I wanted, longer than it should have been. That's different, Mom. She's Diane's mother. And I'm yours. There was no answer that was going to make that right. We both knew it. I was mopping the last room of my shift at the clinic when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A Facebook notification. I almost ignored it. I usually wait until I'm home. But something made me stop. Some pull I can't explain, the way you sometimes know before you know. I took off one glove and opened my phone. Diane had posted a photo. A baby boy. Newborn, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, wrapped in a white hospital blanket with tiny blue stripes. Perfect in the way all new babies are perfect. Unfinished looking and somehow complete. The caption read, "Our whole world arrived today. Welcome, Oliver James Sullivan. Mom and baby are doing beautifully." The first comment was Patricia Whitmore's. "My precious grandson. Grandma was here from the very first breath. I love you forever, my Oliver." I stood in the middle of that empty clinic room, mop in hand, and I read that caption again and again. My grandson had been born. I was finding out through a Facebook post. I looked at the comments scrolling below. Ethan's coworkers, Diane's college friends, neighbors I'd never heard of, all of them celebrating, all of them already part of this moment I had been locked out of. I put my phone back in my pocket. I picked up the mop. I finished the room, because there was still 40 minutes left in my shift, and I had learned a long time ago that the world does not stop for your grief. You keep your hands moving, and you feel what you need to feel later, in private, where it belongs. I drove home in silence, made tea I didn't drink, sat at the kitchen table, the same chair, the same 4 walls that had held 30 years of my life. And I opened Facebook again and looked at my grandson's face for a very long time. He had Ethan's nose, his father's forehead, tiny curled fingers and round cheeks and eyelashes that lay against his skin like small brushstrokes. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I was seeing him for the first time like a stranger, alone at midnight on a screen. I waited until morning to call Ethan. I wanted to be steady. I wanted to be fair. He answered on the 4th ring, voice tired and happy in equal measure. "Mom, I saw the photo. Congratulations, sweetheart. He's beautiful." "Thank you. It was a long day, but everything went well." "I'm so glad." A pause. "Ethan, why didn't you call me?" A sigh. "Everything happened so fast, Mom. She went into labor early. We rushed to the hospital. By the time he arrived, there was so much going on. You had time to post on Facebook." That was Diane. "And you didn't have 2 minutes to call your mother." "Mom, please don't. I'm not making a scene. I'm asking a question." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm your mother. I'm Oliver's grandmother. I should not be finding out through a social media post." "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." The apology had the sound of something said to end a conversation rather than begin one. "Can I come see him?" The pause before he answered told me everything. "Mom, Diane needs to rest. Give us a few days." A few days became 3 weeks. 3 weeks of following my grandson's life through Diane's Facebook posts. Oliver yawning, Oliver sleeping, Oliver's tiny hand wrapped around Patricia Whitmore's finger, with a caption that read, "With the best grandma in the world. Thank you, Mom, for being here from day one." I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I called Dot. She answered on the 2nd ring, the way she always does, as if she'd been waiting. "Tell me," she said. Just that. Just tell me. So I did. When I finished, there was a short silence on the line. "Maggie," Dot said carefully, "what are you going to do?" I looked out my kitchen window at the pecan tree my father had planted the year I was born. Still standing. Still putting out leaves every spring without being asked, without being thanked, without anyone noticing particularly. "I don't know yet," I said, but something was already forming in the quiet part of my mind. Something that felt less like planning and more like arriving, at the edge of a decision I'd been approaching for a long time without realizing it. The phone rang the next morning before I'd finished my coffee. A number with a Chicago area code I didn't recognize. "Good morning. Is this Mrs. Margaret Sullivan?" "Yes." "This is the billing department at Mercy General Hospital. We're following up on an outstanding balance for Mrs. Diane Sullivan's delivery. Your son, Mr. Ethan Sullivan, listed you as the emergency billing contact. The remaining amount, after insurance, is $11,400. I set down my coffee cup very slowly. Ethan had not called to tell me Oliver was born. Ethan had not texted to ask if I'd gotten home safely after 19 hours on a bus. But Ethan had written my name, my phone number, my name, in the box labeled Emergency Billing Contact at Mercy General Hospital. "Mrs. Sullivan? Are you still there?" I looked out the window at the pecan tree. I looked at the kitchen chair where Ethan used to sit and do his homework while I made dinner, and the house smelled like something warm, and we were enough for each other. We were always enough. Then I picked up the phone again and said in a voice I barely recognized as my own, clear and calm and absolute, "I'm sorry. I think there's been a mistake. I don't have any family in Chicago." I hung up the phone and sat very still for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a cardinal landed on the pecan tree, stayed for a moment, and flew away. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor was starting a lawnmower, the sound pulling and catching, until it finally held. I waited for the guilt to arrive. That was what I expected. The familiar rush of it, the way it always came when I drew any line at all, that voice that sounded like good mothering but wasn't. You went too far. You'll regret this. He needs you. Go fix it. It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter, something I didn't have a name for yet. A stillness that felt less like emptiness and more like the moment after you've set down something very heavy, when your arms don't quite know what to do with themselves, and the absence of the weight is almost startling. I finished my coffee. I washed the cup. I went to work. Dot showed up at 4:30 that afternoon, the way she had been showing up at 4:30 for the better part of 40 years. Unannounced, reliable, carrying something from the bakery on Clement Street. That day it was lemon pound cake, which she set on my kitchen counter without ceremony and began slicing like a woman with a purpose. "Talk," she said. So I told her. All of it. The billing call, what I'd said, the silence afterward. I told it flat and plain, the way you tell something when you've already decided you're not going to perform it. Dot listened without interrupting, which was notable because Dot almost always interrupted. When I finished, she put a slice of cake in front of me and sat down across the table. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know exactly. Take a guess." I thought about it honestly, like I finally told the truth. Dot nodded slowly. She picked up her fork. "Then that's where you start." She didn't tell me I was right. She didn't tell me I was wrong. That was one of the things about Dot. 40 years of friendship, and she still understood that what I needed was not a verdict. What I needed was someone to sit across the table from me while I figured out what I actually thought. We ate the lemon cake. We talked about her granddaughter's school play. We watched the evening light move across the kitchen floor. It was, I realized later, exactly what I needed. The messages from Ethan started the next morning. I had turned my phone off the night before. Not to hide, but because I wanted one night that belonged only to me, without the noise of consequences. When I turned it back on at 7 a.m., the screen filled up like a weather report that had been building for days. 27 missed calls over 3 days, 15 text messages. I read them in order. The first, "Mom, I need to talk to you. Please call me." The third, "Mom, the hospital said you told them you have no family in Chicago. What does that mean? Call me." The seventh, "Mom, this is serious. The balance is going to collections if it's not addressed. Please call me back." The 12th, "I can't believe you're doing this. Call me." The 15th, the last one, "Diane was right about you." I read that one twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and made myself a second cup of coffee before I read it a third time. "Diane was right about you." I thought about the woman who had received my Facebook message without answering it, who had accepted my knitted blanket without a word of thanks, who had sat beside me in a hospital waiting room and answered my questions in single syllables while holding my grandson just out of reach. I thought about what exactly Diane had said about me. What version of me existed in that household? What shape I had been given in my absence? What story had been told about the woman in Tennessee who called too often and wanted too much and didn't understand that things were different now? Diane was right about you. I picked up my phone and opened a new email to Ethan. I typed and deleted and typed and deleted. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I wanted to say it in a way that could not be misread, could not be argued with, could not be folded up into proof of whatever I was supposed to be guilty of. In the end, I wrote this: "Ethan, your father taught me that family means showing up, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. In the last 2 years, I have watched you show up for Diane's family in every way that mattered. I have asked for nothing except to be part of my grandson's life, and I have been treated like an inconvenience at best and an intruder at worst. I traveled 19 hours to stand in a hallway for 4 minutes. I found out Oliver was born through a Facebook post. I was given 2 hours and 5 minutes with him, 5 of which were in a moving taxi, before I was sent back to a bus station alone. And then your name appeared on a hospital bill, listed as someone whose mother would pay it. I won't pay that bill, not because I don't love you, and not because I don't love Oliver. I love that boy more than I can say, and I have never even been given the chance to show him that. I won't pay it, because the only time I seem to matter in your life is when something is needed from me. That is not a relationship. That is an arrangement. and I deserve more than an arrangement. When you're ready for something real, something honest, where I am a person and not a resource, I will be here. I have always been here. You know where to find me. Love, Mom. I read it once, then I sent it before I could take it back. The reply came 14 hours later. 4 sentences. I can't believe how selfish you are. You're willing to let our credit get destroyed over some grudge. Diane was right about you from the very beginning. Goodbye. I read it standing at the kitchen counter, still in my work clothes, one shoe off. Goodbye. Not I'm angry, and I'll call you when I calm down. Not we need to talk about this properly. Just goodbye. As if 34 years could be packed up and set outside the door in a single word. I put my phone in my bag. I took off my other shoe. I made dinner, chicken soup, because it was what my mother made when the world felt too large and too cold, and some habits are worth keeping. I ate alone. I washed the dishes. I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. Not because they were full of drama, but because they were full of nothing. And nothing, when you have spent 34 years organizing your days around someone else's needs, turns out to be a very loud thing. Ethan did not call. I did not call. The silence between us had weight and texture, like a third presence in the house. The first week was the hardest. I caught myself reaching for my phone at 9 p.m., muscle memory, pure and simple. Before I remembered there was no call coming, I found myself composing texts in my head that I never sent. Did you eat today? Is Oliver sleeping better? Are you okay? The questions that had no place to go. By the second week, something began to shift. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I started sleeping through the night again. I noticed, slowly and with some surprise, that the low-grade tension I'd been carrying for 2 years, the constant waiting, the constant wondering what I'd done wrong, the constant adjusting of myself to try to fit into a space that kept shrinking, had begun to ease. I was not happy, but I was honest, and Dot had been right about where that was the place to start. She came by on a Wednesday in March, letting herself in the back door the way she'd been doing since 1987, and announced that we were going to the community center. For what? I asked. Pottery class. Dorothy. It starts in 40 minutes. I already paid for both of us. I looked at her. She looked at me with the particular expression she reserved for moments when she had already decided something and was merely waiting for me to catch up. I got my jacket. The pottery class was held in a low-ceilinged room that smelled of clay and old coffee, taught by a woman named Gloria, who wore paint-stained overalls and spoke about centering clay with the gravity of someone delivering a sermon. I sat down at the wheel and looked at the lump of clay in front of me and thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. Then Gloria put her hands over mine and said, Don't think about what you're making. Just feel where the resistance is. I don't know why that hit me the way it did. I spent most of that first class making things that looked nothing like what I intended. A bowl that became a vase that became something that was honestly neither. Dot, beside me, made something she called a dish that was more of a philosophical concept than an object. We drove home laughing, real laughing, the kind that starts in your stomach. And I realized I hadn't laughed like that in longer than I could remember. I went back the next Wednesday, and the one after that. I started taking morning walks around the lake at the edge of town, something I hadn't done since Thomas was alive. I reread To Kill a Mockingbird and The Color Purple, and a mystery novel Dot pressed into my hands that I finished in 2 days. I cooked real meals, not just enough to get through the evening, but the kind of cooking that takes an afternoon and fills the house with smell and warmth. I was learning slowly and imperfectly how to live in my own life again. One evening in April, I was sitting on the back porch watching the light go off the pecan tree, and I thought about Thomas, about what he would say if he could see me now. Not the last 2 years of trying to make myself smaller and smaller to fit into my son's life, but now, sitting on this porch in the good evening air, with clay still under my fingernails and a half-finished mystery on the table beside me. I thought he would recognize me. I thought he might even be proud. It was a Saturday morning in May when the letter arrived. Not an email, a letter, actual paper, in an envelope with a Hartford, Connecticut return address I didn't recognize at first. Then I did. Diane's handwriting, small and neat and slightly forward-leaning, like someone walking into a wind. I stood on the front porch and looked at the envelope for a long moment, Then I took it inside, made a cup of tea, and sat down at the kitchen table before I opened it. 4 pages, handwritten. Some of the lines were slightly uneven, like she'd been writing at an odd angle, or like her hands hadn't been quite steady. She didn't begin with an apology. I noticed that immediately, and I respected it. An apology at the top of a letter like this would have felt like a transaction, something to get through before the real thing. Instead, she began with something that surprised me entirely. Mrs. Sullivan, Maggie, I need to tell you something that I have never told Ethan completely, and that I have never said out loud to anyone except my therapist. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to understand what actually happened, even if understanding it doesn't change anything. She wrote about her mother, Patricia Whitmore, college professor, always impeccably dressed, always the most composed person in the room. Patricia, it turned out, had spent Diane's entire childhood making her feel like a guest in her own family. Measured affection, conditional approval, the sense always that love was something you earned through performance rather than something that simply existed. Every woman my mother perceived as a threat to her position. Her sisters-in-law, my father's mother, women in their friend group who were too warm, too present, too loved. She found a way to diminish them. Quietly, efficiently. And she taught me, without ever saying it directly, that this was how you protected what was yours. Then, Anne, when Ethan first talked about you, the way he talked about you, I decided you were a threat before I ever met you. Every sacrifice you'd made, every story he told, the way he said my mom like it meant something absolute. I heard all of it as, you will always come second to her. And instead of examining that fear, instead of talking to Ethan or to you, I made sure it became true. I made sure you came second. I made sure you came last. I set the letter down and looked out the window. The cardinal was back in the pecan tree. Or maybe a different cardinal. I couldn't be sure. I picked the letter back up. I am not telling you this to excuse what happened. There is no excuse. You traveled 19 hours and were sent home. You found out your grandson was born from a Facebook post. You were treated like a stranger by the person your son chose to love, and he allowed it because he didn't know how to choose both of us, and I let him believe he had to choose. What I did to you came from fear. That doesn't make it smaller. It just means I want you to know that it was never about you. Not really. You were never the problem. You were the reminder of something I was afraid of, and I took it out on you, and I am deeply sorry. I don't know if you can forgive me. I'm not sure I've earned the right to ask. But Ethan has been different since you stopped answering. Quieter, like something essential went missing. And Oliver, here the handwriting changed slightly. Smaller, more careful. Oliver will grow up not knowing his grandmother because of choices I made. That is something I have to carry. I just needed you to know that I know. Whatever you decide, you deserve the truth. No request, no ask, no please call me or I hope we can move forward. Just the truth, offered without a bow on it. I folded the letter carefully, along its original creases. I held it for a moment. Then I opened the dark brown leather bag my mother had given me 40 years ago, and I placed the letter inside, next to the photo of Thomas, next to the picture of Ethan at 5 years old. The things I kept because they were true. I didn't call Diane that day. I wasn't ready. But something in me, the hard, defended place that had been braced for so long, released something. Not completely. Not like a door swinging open. More like a window, cracked just slightly, letting in air, because I understood something now that I hadn't before. The person who had hurt me was not a villain. She was a frightened woman who had learned the wrong lessons from the wrong teacher and had passed that damage along without meaning to, the way damage always travels, quietly, through families, generation to generation, until someone decides to stop. My enemy had never been Diane Whitmore. My enemy had been fear. Hers, mine. The fear that love is a limited resource, that someone else's gain means your loss, that you have to hold tight or you'll lose everything. I had been afraid of losing my son. She had been afraid of losing her husband. We had both been wrong about how love works. The phone rang on a Thursday evening in late October, 8 months after I told the hospital I had no family in Chicago. I was on the back porch, half watching the last of the daylight leave the pecan tree, a cup of tea going cold in my hand. Chicago area code, Mercy General Hospital. My stomach tightened. Not with dread exactly, more with the particular alertness of someone who has learned to pay attention. "Mrs. Sullivan? My name is Sandra Ford. I'm a social worker here at Mercy General. I'm calling about your daughter-in-law, Diane Sullivan." I set down the tea. She was admitted 2 days ago. Severe postpartum depression and acute anxiety crisis. She's stable. I want to make sure you know that first. She's stable and receiving care, but your son is here with her, and he's not able to manage both her care and the baby's needs simultaneously. Oliver. His name came out of me before I decided to say it. Yes, Oliver is currently at a temporary care facility, but they can only hold his placement until tomorrow morning. After that, the hospital would need to contact an outside agency. I stood up from my chair. "Mr. Sullivan listed you as the secondary emergency contact," Sandra Ford said carefully. "I want to be transparent with you. You were the second call. The first contact, Mrs. Patricia Whitmore, was reached this morning." "And?" A brief pause. The kind that contains something the speaker isn't sure they should say. "Mrs. Whitmore indicated she wasn't in a position to help at this time." Patricia Whitmore. The best grandma in the world, according to Diane's caption. The woman who had been there from the very first breath. Not in a position to help. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds. Oliver was 19 months old. He was in a temporary care facility in a city I hadn't visited in 8 months. His mother was in a hospital bed. His father was sitting in a waiting room, alone, which I knew without being told because I knew my son, and I knew that particular kind of alone. "Mrs. Sullivan," Sandra Ford said gently, "would you be able to come?" I thought about 8 months of mornings without the weight of waiting. Pottery class on Wednesdays. Walks around the lake. Tea on the back porch. The quiet life I had been slowly, carefully building back into something that felt like mine. I thought about a yellow blanket with Oliver stitched in white in the corner, tucked into a box somewhere in a Chicago apartment. I thought about 5 minutes in a taxi and a small hand wrapping around my finger, and the way that weight had felt. That specific, irreplaceable weight of a child who is yours in the way that skips a generation and goes straight to the bone. "I'll come," I said. Then I added, and I want to be precise about this, because the words mattered. "But I need you to understand something, Ms. Ford. I'm not coming because they need me. I'm coming because Oliver is my grandson, and he is innocent in all of this, and he deserves to have someone there who loves him without conditions. I'm coming on my own terms, not because I was called as a last resort." Sandra Ford was quiet for a moment. "I understand," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. I went inside. I called Dot. "Chicago," I said when she answered. "When?" "Tonight. There's a bus at 9. "Do you want me to drive you to the station?" "Yes. I'll be there at 8:15. A pause. "Maggie?" "Yeah?" "You're doing the right thing." I looked around my kitchen. The table, the chair, the window, the tree. Everything exactly as it had always been. "I know," I said. "That's why it doesn't feel hard." I packed a bag. Not the frantic, hopeful packing of the woman who had traveled 19 hours imagining a reunion that didn't happen. Just careful, practical packing. Enough for 2 weeks, comfortable clothes, the things I would need to take care of a toddler in an unfamiliar place. I put the dark brown leather bag over my shoulder. Inside it, Thomas's photo. Ethan at 5 years old. Diane's letter. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of tissue paper I'd been saving for no reason I could name. A small photograph I'd printed from Facebook months ago, on a night when I couldn't stop myself. Oliver, 6 months old, asleep in his crib, one fist pressed against his cheek. I had carried that photo for 8 months without anyone knowing. I zipped the bag closed. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked out to wait for Dot on the front porch, in the cool October dark, under a sky that was just beginning to fill with stars. I was not the same woman who had stood in that hospital hallway 19 months ago, hoping to be chosen. I had done the harder thing. I had chosen myself. And now, from that ground, I was choosing to go. Not because I had to, not because I'd been summoned, not because my worth had been measured in dollars on a billing form, but because I was Oliver Sullivan's grandmother. And I had decided that was going to mean something, whether they were ready for it or not. The bus pulled out of Nashville at 9:15. I had a window seat, which I always prefer, not for the view necessarily, but for the sense of having one side that nothing can approach from. 19 hours is a long time to be alone with your thoughts. I had done this trip twice before, both times with my heart full of something that turned out to be wrong. The first time, hope that collapsed in a hospital hallway. The second time, wounded determination that ended in 5 minutes in a taxi. This time was different. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to perform gratitude for being allowed in. I wasn't going to make myself small and careful and apologetic, the way I had learned to be around Diane, around the whole architecture of my son's new life in which I had been assigned the role of inconvenient background detail. I was going because Oliver needed someone, and I was that someone, and that was enough of a reason. I slept for a few hours somewhere in Kentucky, my head against the cold glass, the highway lights sliding past in long orange streaks. I dreamed about Thomas, not the Thomas of the hospital, not the Thomas of the last months, but the early Thomas, the one who used to sit on the back steps on summer evenings and tell me about whatever he'd been thinking about all day, quiet and unhurried, like a man who trusted that time was not running out. I woke up somewhere in Indiana with the particular clarity that sometimes comes after a short sleep, things arranged in the mind more honestly than they were before. I was ready. Chicago in October is a different city than Chicago in February. The light is softer, more golden, less brutal. The lake was visible in the distance as the bus pulled into the terminal, flat and silver under a pale morning sky. I called Sandra Ford from the station. She gave me the address of the temporary care facility. 12 minutes by cab, she said, and told me Ethan was still at the hospital with Diane but knew I was coming. He asked me to tell you, she started. It's all right, I said. I'll see him when I see him. The care facility was a clean, well-lit building on a residential street, the kind of place that tries hard to feel like it isn't what it is. A young woman at the front desk checked my ID, made a phone call, walked me down a short hallway. She opened a door. The room was small and bright, with a low table covered in plastic toys and a blue mat on the floor. Oliver was sitting in the middle of the mat, holding a small red toy car, turning it over in his hands with the focused concentration of someone doing important work. He looked up when I came in, 19 months old, dark hair like Ethan's, wide eyes that were... I could see it immediately and it hit me somewhere below the ribs. Thomas's eyes, the exact shape and color of Thomas's eyes, as if something of him had traveled forward through time and decided to live here, in this small person sitting on a blue mat in Chicago. Hi, Oliver, I said. I stayed in the doorway, not wanting to rush him. My name is Maggie. I'm your grandma. He looked at me steadily. Toddlers have no social performance. They look at you with the pure assessment of someone who has not yet learned to pretend. He looked at me for 5 full seconds. Then he held up the red toy car, offering it in my direction. I crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside him. I took the car. I turned it over in my hands, the way he had. I handed it back. He smiled, sudden and complete, like a light switching on, and said something that sounded approximately like vroom. Vroom, I agreed. We sat on that blue mat together for 20 minutes before anyone came to find us, and in those 20 minutes Oliver showed me every toy in the room with the thoroughness of a museum curator, and I gave each one my full and genuine attention. And by the time a staff member appeared in the doorway, Oliver was sitting in my lap with his head tilted back against my collarbone, and I was looking at the ceiling, trying not to cry. Mrs. Sullivan, we have the paperwork ready whenever you are. Give us just a minute, I said. She smiled and closed the door. I looked down at the top of Oliver's head, the dark hair, the small ear, the perfect geography of a child who had no idea yet what the adults around him had put each other through. Okay, sweetheart, I said quietly. Let's go. Ethan had arranged for me to stay at their apartment, a 2-bedroom in Lincoln Square, on the 3rd floor of a building with a slow elevator and a view of a side street lined with maple trees that had gone full autumn gold. I let myself in with the key Ethan had left at the front desk, stood in the entrance for a moment, taking it in, the life my son had built, which I had seen only in the background of photographs. It was a good apartment, warm colors, books on shelves, Oliver's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. Evidence of a life being lived. A real one, not a performance. Ethan's muddy work boots by the door. Diane's cardigan over the back of a chair. Oliver's small sneakers, one upright and one tipped on its side, arranged as if he'd just stepped out of them mid-run. I found the yellow blanket in the closet off the hallway. It had been washed. I could tell by the way it was folded, differently than I'd packed it. Someone had used it, laundered it, folded it back, not put in a box, kept within reach. I held it for a moment. Then I went and put it on Oliver's bed, spread out over the pillow, the way you make a room say someone is coming home. Oliver, standing in the doorway of his own room, pointed at the blanket. "Mine," he said with absolute authority. "Yours," I agreed. He walked in, climbed up onto the bed with the efficiency of a child who has done this 10,000 times, lay down on top of the blanket, and looked at me. "Stay," he said. I pulled the small chair from the corner of the room and sat beside his bed. "I'm staying," I told him. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Ethan came that evening. I heard the key in the lock and stayed in the kitchen, where I was making soup. The same chicken soup my mother made, the same I had made the night Ethan's world fell apart at 15, the recipe that meant I am here and I am not leaving. He stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked terrible, the specific terrible of someone who has not slept properly in days, who has been afraid in a sustained and quiet way that wears the face down to something raw. He looked, I realized with a shock of recognition, like he had looked the night Thomas died. "Mom," he said it like he'd forgotten how the word felt in his mouth and was surprised to find it still worked. I turned from the stove. I looked at my son, this man I had made, this person I had carried and fed and held and prayed over and sacrificed for, and finally let myself step back from. And I felt something that was not quite forgiveness, and not quite anger, and not quite love, but was made of all three the way soup is made of separate things that eventually become one thing. "How is she?" I asked. "Better than yesterday." He set his keys on the counter, the way he'd always done, and the familiarity of that gesture, keys on the counter, home for the night, undid something in me that I hadn't known was still wound tight. "They say another week, maybe 10 days. It was bad, Mom. It got really bad before she asked for help." "I know. She didn't want anyone to know she was struggling. She thought," he stopped. "She thought if she wasn't perfect at it, her mother would..." Another stop. "I know," I said again, quieter this time. He looked at me. "She wrote you a letter." "I know that too." He absorbed this, nodded once, slowly. Then he looked at the pot on the stove and his face did something complicated that ended in something close to relief. "Is that..." "Sit down, Ethan." He sat. We ate together at the kitchen table, the two of us, with Oliver's baby monitor on the counter between us, sending up the small sounds of a child sleeping. Chicken soup and the end of a loaf of bread I'd found in the freezer. Nothing fancy. Nothing performed. For a while we didn't talk about any of it. I asked about the soup. He said it was right. Exactly right. He asked about Dot. I told him about the pottery class and he laughed, genuinely, for the first time all evening. "You? Pottery?" I made a bowl that Dot said looked like a concept rather than an object. That does sound like you, actually." "It does not." "Mom, you once described a recipe as philosophically straightforward." I had in fact said that. About a pot roast. We were quiet for a moment, the laughter settling. Then Ethan put down his spoon and looked at the table. "I don't know when I became that person," he said. "I've been trying to figure out the exact moment. There wasn't one, I don't think. It kept being easier to give Diane what she asked for than to push back. And it kept being easier to let you wait than to have the conversation. And one day I looked up, and I had turned into someone I would not have recognized at 22. I didn't say anything. I waited. She told me things weren't going to work if you were in our lives. Not in those words, exactly, but that was what it meant. And I kept thinking if I could just make her feel secure enough, she'd change her mind. She'd see that you weren't, that you were just my mother, and that didn't have to be a threat. He looked up. But I was the one who had to say that, and I never said it. "No," I agreed. "You didn't. I kept waiting for it to fix itself. Things don't fix themselves, Ethan. I know that now." He was quiet for a moment. "When you stopped answering, when I realized you'd actually gone, I kept thinking you'd call eventually, that you'd cave because you always did, because I'd trained you to cave." He said this carefully, like someone who has rehearsed a hard truth. "And then you didn't, and weeks went by, and I had to start understanding that what I'd done was actually..." He stopped. "Enough," I said. He looked up. "What you did was enough to make me go," I said. "That's what you need to understand. Not a little too much, not slightly over some invisible line. Enough. Enough that I had to choose between my dignity and my access to my grandson, and that should never have been a choice you put in front of me. Ethan's jaw tightened. His eyes were bright. I know, he said. The words were small, but they were real. Not the hollow apology of the email he'd sent 8 months ago. Not a transaction. Something he'd arrived at the hard way, through the kind of loss that teaches. We sat with it for a moment. The monitor on the counter crackled softly, Oliver shifting in his sleep, then went quiet again. I'm not going to pretend the last 2 years didn't happen, I said finally. I won't do that. It would be dishonest, and we are going to be honest with each other from now on, you and I, or we're not going to be much of anything. Okay. But I'm also not going to let those 2 years be the last 2 years that matter between us. I looked at my son, really looked at him, the tired eyes and the Thomas jaw and the hands that were his father's hands. We start from here. No pretending, no performing, just honest. He nodded. Something in his face settled, not into happiness, but into something more durable than happiness, something that looked like the beginning of solid ground. Oliver said vroom to me for 20 minutes today, I said. Ethan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. That's basically all he says right now, that and mine. He's very clear on what's his. Gets it from his grandmother, apparently. I looked at him. He looked at me. We didn't hug, not yet. That would come later, when it was ready. But something moved between us across that kitchen table. Something quiet and load-bearing, like a beam being set back into place. It was enough. For that night, it was enough. Diane came home 8 days later. I had been there long enough by then that the apartment had taken on the rhythms of our presence together. Oliver's schedule, meals at regular times, the particular geography of the kitchen that I'd learned without being taught. The yellow blanket lived on Oliver's bed. His sneakers by the door were both upright now, because I couldn't walk past tipped-over shoes without setting them right. Some things don't change. I heard the elevator in the hallway, then Ethan's key. I stayed in the kitchen. I heard them come in. Ethan's voice low, Diane's quieter, the sound of a coat being hung, a bag set down. Then Oliver's voice from the living room. Mama, high and certain and full of a love that didn't require any history, any explanation, any earning. Just you are mine, and you are here. I stood at the kitchen counter and listened to Diane cry. After a few minutes, footsteps in the hallway. Ethan looked in, nodded once, she's ready, and stepped back. Diane appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but the particular armor she had always worn around me, that composed, evaluating stillness, was gone. She looked like someone who had been taken apart and was still figuring out how the pieces went back together. She looked at me. I looked at her. The soup smells good, she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort in it. There's enough, I said. Sit down. She came and sat at the kitchen table. I brought her a bowl. She looked at it for a moment, then looked up at me. I'm sorry, she said. Not preamble, not build-up. Just the words, plain. I know, I said. I got your letter. She closed her eyes briefly. I wasn't sure if you'd read it. I read it 3 times. She nodded. Her hands were wrapped around the bowl, and I noticed they were trembling slightly. Not dramatically, just the fine tremor of someone who has been through something that hasn't finished moving through them yet. I don't expect you to. Diane, she stopped. Eat the soup. We can talk after. She ate. I sat across from her with my tea. Outside in the living room, Oliver was telling Ethan something at great length and volume about the red toy car. When the bowl was empty, Diane looked up. My mother was never gentle, she said. Not once. Not to me, not to anyone she felt threatened by. And I promised myself I would never let anyone have that kind of power over my family, over Oliver. She paused. But in trying to protect him from what I grew up with, I became exactly what I was trying to protect him from. I made him grow up without you. The window above the sink showed the maple trees on the street below, their leaves the specific heartbreaking gold of mid-October. You're not your mother, I said. Diane looked at me carefully. You made choices that hurt me. That's true, and I won't pretend it isn't. But you also wrote me 4 pages by hand and told me the truth without asking for anything in return. Your mother would never have done that. I held her gaze. That's not nothing, Diane. That's actually quite a lot. Something moved across her face. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of it. The particular softening that happens when someone who has been braced for punishment understands they are not going to be punished. I want to try, she said. I don't know how to do this. I didn't have a model for it. But I want to try. Then we try, I said. Imperfectly, honestly. And if something's wrong, we say so. We don't let it build up until it explodes. She nodded. And Diane, she looked up. Oliver calls me Grandma Maggie now. I need that to stay. For the first time in the 2 years I had known her. Through photographs, through careful social media performances, through the cold waiting room and the taxi and the one handshake at the wedding, Diane Whitmore Sullivan smiled at me like a real person. Grandma Maggie, she said. That's a good name. I stayed for 3 weeks in the end. There were hard days. Moments when the old tension flickered, when Diane and I had to navigate each other carefully, when Ethan said something that opened an old wound and we had to stop and name it rather than let it pass. That was the agreement, and we kept it, imperfectly but genuinely. There were good days, too. Many of them. Oliver, it turned out, was a person with opinions about breakfast foods, about which story came first, about the precise arrangement of his toy cars on the windowsill. He and I developed a morning routine. Wake up, yellow blanket, vroom for 20 minutes, oatmeal, Grandma Maggie outside, in a voice that made it impossible to say no. We went to the park most mornings, the two of us, while Ethan worked and Diane rested or attended her appointments. Oliver had discovered pigeons and regarded them with a combination of fascination and personal offense. He would charge toward them with his arms wide, watch them scatter, look back at me with pure delight. Again, I agreed. On my last evening, Ethan and Diane sat with me at the kitchen table after Oliver was in bed. We had wine, something I rarely drank, but it felt like an occasion that called for it. When will you come back? Ethan asked. Thanksgiving, I said, if I'm invited. You're invited, Diane said. No hesitation. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. I took the bus home the next morning. 19 hours. The same road, the same seat by the window, the same highway unreeling south and then east and then home. But everything was different in the way that matters, not the outside, but the orientation. I was going home to my own life, which was real and full and mine, and I was also going home to a family that was being rebuilt, slowly and honestly, in the way that things built carefully are built to last. When I came through my front door, the house was exactly as I'd left it. Coffee cup in the drying rack, Thomas's radio on the shelf, the pecan tree visible through the kitchen window, bare now in late October, all its bones showing in the pale afternoon light. Dot called that evening. Well? I sat down at the kitchen table. It's a beginning, I said. Is that enough? I thought about it honestly, the way she always made me think about things. It's more than I had, I said. And it's real. That makes it enough. 3 years passed. Oliver grew from a toddler with opinions into a small person with a whole personality, funny and stubborn and tender in the way that children are tender when they feel safe, without even knowing that safety is something that had to be built. Ethan found stable work with a firm in Chicago. Diane continued therapy, which she talked about openly now, without apology, which I respected more than I could say. Patricia Whitmore remained on the edges of their life, present at holidays, careful in the way people are careful when they understand they almost lost something and cannot say precisely why they didn't throw it away. I visited every few months, sometimes longer stays, sometimes just a long weekend. Each time, Oliver met me at the door. Grandma Maggie, like it was the best thing that had happened all week, with the uncomplicated joy of someone who does not yet know that love can be withheld, because in his experience, it never has been. Diane and I were not best friends. We were not what I might have imagined in some earlier version of my hopes when I thought about what it would mean to have a daughter-in-law. We were something more honest than that. 2 women who had hurt each other and chosen, eyes open, to build something anyway. We had a language between us that was mostly practical and occasionally warm and always truthful, and I had come to value that more than I would have valued a performance of closeness. One afternoon, Oliver was nearly 4, running in the backyard while Diane and I sat on the back steps with coffee. She said, without looking at me, "My mother called last week. She wants to come for Christmas. I waited. I told her we already had plans. A pause. We do have plans, right? You're asking if you're invited to my house for Christmas? She looked at me sideways. I'm asking if I'm invited. Dorothy Hawkins makes a fruitcake that tastes like a Christmas miracle. You're invited. Diane smiled at her coffee cup. Okay. In the yard, Oliver was attempting to explain something to a squirrel on the fence. The squirrel was not engaged, but Oliver was committed to the conversation. He's going to be a talker, I said. He already is, Diane said. I can't imagine where he gets it. We both watched him. The afternoon light was the particular gold of late autumn, the kind that makes everything look like it's being kept. Oliver's preschool graduation was on a Friday in May. The school was a low brick building 6 blocks from the apartment, with finger paintings in every window and a hand-painted banner above the front door that read, "Congratulations, class of little learners," in 12 different colors. Ethan and Diane were there with a camera that Ethan kept adjusting and then forgetting he was holding. Dot had driven up from Nashville because she said she wasn't going to miss it. And when Dot says she isn't going to miss something, you simply plan around her presence. The ceremony was held in the school's small gymnasium, folding chairs set up in rows, a little stage at the front with a podium approximately the height of a traffic cone. The children filed in wearing construction paper graduation caps decorated with stickers. I found my seat in the second row. Ethan and Diane were beside me. Dot was on my other side, already crying preemptively, which was very Dot. The children were introduced one by one, small figures crossing the stage, accepting their rolled-up certificates, the audience applauding with the enthusiasm of people who understand that this is not really about the certificate. Then the teacher said, "Oliver Sullivan." He walked out from the wings, serious, focused, the way he was when he was doing something he'd decided was important. He crossed the stage. He took his certificate. He turned to face the audience, and then he stopped. He was looking for something. I watched him scan the rows, face moving left to right with the methodical attention of a small person who knows what he's looking for and will not stop until he finds it. He found it. His face changed. That sudden, complete smile, the light switching on smile, the one I had first seen on a blue mat in a care facility when he handed me a red toy car. He came off the stage without waiting to be dismissed. His teacher called his name. Several parents laughed. He did not care. He was already moving, down the steps, up the aisle, arms coming up as he ran. "Grandma Maggie!" I was already out of my chair. I went down to meet him and caught him as he arrived. All 28 pounds of him, arms around my neck, the particular smell of a child who has been doing important work all morning. I held him the way I had been waiting to hold him since before he was born. Not for 5 minutes in a taxi, not for a carefully managed visit, not as a privilege extended and then withdrawn. Just held him, my grandson, mine, in the way that is permanent and does not require permission. "I love you, Grandma Maggie," he said into my shoulder. I pressed my face into his dark hair and breathed. Around us, the gymnasium kept going. Other children, other families, the ordinary beautiful noise of people celebrating small people who are just beginning. Dot was crying openly now. Ethan had his hand over his mouth. Diane was watching with the expression of someone who understands that they are witnessing something that cost a great deal to arrive at. "I love you too, baby," I said. "More than you will ever know." He leaned back and looked at me with Thomas's eyes. "Are you crying, Grandma Maggie?" "A little." He considered this. "It's okay," he said with great seriousness. "Sometimes things make you cry because they're really good." I laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that clears things out. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes they do." I am 65 years old. I sit on my back porch most evenings now, with tea, watching the last light leave the pecan tree my father planted the year I was born. Still standing, still putting out leaves every spring. The dark brown leather bag my mother gave me hangs by the front door. Inside it, in the order I put things there, Thomas's photo, Ethan at 5 years old, Diane's letter, soft now from being unfolded and refolded many times, a photograph of Oliver and me in the park on a Sunday afternoon, both of us laughing at something the camera didn't catch, and at the very bottom, still wrapped in its tissue paper, the Facebook photo. Oliver at 6 months old, asleep, one fist against his cheek. I kept it because it's true. All of it is true. The pain and the waiting and the 5 minutes in a taxi and the billing call and the morning on the blue mat and the preschool gymnasium and all the ordinary Tuesdays in between. It happened. It cost what it cost. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But I am also 65 years old, and I have my grandson and my son and an honest relationship with a woman I once thought was my adversary. And most importantly, I have myself. The self I almost gave away entirely in the business of being needed. The self I had to go very quiet and very still to find again. I once thought being a good mother meant always being available, always absorbing, always making yourself smaller so the other person could feel larger. I know better now. Being a good mother, being a good anything, means knowing what you're worth. Not in the aggressive way, not in the way that makes demands or keeps score. In the quiet way, the way that simply will not accept being treated as nothing, because it knows, without needing to prove it to anyone, that it is not nothing. My mother told me to carry that bag during the important moments. She was right about that, as she was right about most things. She was also right about something else she told me once, years ago, standing at the kitchen stove in Nashville in the particular light of a winter afternoon. Margaret, the people who love you right will find their way to you, and the ones who don't, you have to love them enough to let them figure out what they're losing. I let my son figure it out. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was also the bravest. Not every story ends perfectly. Mine didn't. There are still awkward holidays and careful conversations and moments when the past surfaces like something submerged, briefly before going under again. But there is also Oliver running to me across a gymnasium. There is also Ethan calling on Sunday evenings. Real calls now, long ones, the kind where neither of us is watching the clock. There is also Diane, sitting beside me on a back porch last September, watching Oliver chase fireflies in the yard, saying quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I didn't answer right away. I watched my grandson run through the dark with his hands cupped around light. "Thank you for being worth not giving up on," I said. And that, I think, is as close to a happy ending as the truth ever gets, which is to say, it's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. If this story found something in you, a memory, a wound, a hope, I hope you'll share it, not for me, but because somewhere out there is another woman sitting at a kitchen table, wondering if she's wrong for needing to matter. She isn't. You aren't. You never were.